Welcome back to A-Star Science, our GCSE Must Know Chemistry series. Today we're going to look specifically at covalent versus ionic bonding and how do we draw the diagrams, the dot and cross diagrams for both of them. Let's quickly recap what the two types of bonding are. So covalent bonding is when we have bonding between two nonmetals, two or more nonmetals. And electrons are shared in covalent bonding. An example of this would be any of the diatomic gases like hydrogen, oxygen. Water is an example because there's two or more nonmetals, hydrogen and oxygen, carbon dioxide, and even glucose. C6H12O6. That's why we call glucose a molecule, because covalent forms simple molecules. Ionic, on the other hand, ionic is formed between a metal and a nonmetal. Electrons are not shared. In this case, electrons are lost or gained. An example of this is sodium chloride. We see a metal, sodium, and chlorine is a nonmetal. Iron oxide is another example. These are very good examples. You have metals and nonmetals, okay? And they form giant lattice structures. But how do we draw these structures? So what do the diagrams look like for covalent versus ionic bonding? Well, let's look at an example for hydrogen as a molecule. Hydrogen on the periodic table has one electron on its outer shell. I know this because it's in group 1, but we can see the molecule is made up of two atoms. So I need another hydrogen. Now, it wouldn't be clear if I did two X's as electrons. These signify electrons. If I did two X's as electrons, you wouldn't really know what's what. So instead, I'm going to use a dot for the other electron. And covalent, we said, is shearing. So this is how you're going to show the shearing. You're going to draw a shell, an orbit around each of the atoms and include the electrons. You could also draw the molecule like this, with the line representing the bond. So this two electrons is the same as this line going across. Every single bond has two electrons. Let's try another example. We can use a similar covalent molecule, hydrogen chloride. So we know that hydrogen again has one electron, okay? And we're going to draw the circle around that. And then we're going to do something similar for chlorine, which is in group 7. So that means it's going to have 7 electrons. And I'm going to draw these as dots. So here are 6 and then 7 inside. Notice now that they're sharing the 2 electrons. And we could also do the same without the dot and cross. But this bond represents 2 electrons being shared. So this is covalent. And you'll see a lot of different examples of this for methane and for oxygen. Let's look at ionic now. So ionic is a metal and a nonmetal together. A simple ionic that we can draw is lithium chloride. Okay, lithium chloride. Lithium has 3 electrons with 1 on the outer shell, like that. And chlorine has 7, as we just said, on the outer shell. And I'm going to do these as dots. Here's the 7. Now, unlike covalent, these electrons, covalent is shared, we said. Whereas ionic, they lose or gain, or they get transferred. So the electrons are going to be lost or gained. Now, chlorine has 7 in the outer shell, and lithium has 1. Chlorine wants to gain 1 more to fill its octet to make it 8. So lithium is going to lose that. How do we draw the ionic bond? We then put in a bracket to show what's been lost. So now lithium has none in that shell. And since it's lost an electron, it's become positive 1. Now that doesn't sound intuitive. How can it lose something and become positive? We have to remember that this is a charge. It is not positive like in maths where you add. It's a +1 charge. Chlorine now has gained an electron. So if we do chlorine, let me give myself a bit more space. If we do the chlorine atom, or ion in this case, we put the brackets around it to show it's an ion, and we're going to draw that shell around with the electrons, 7 of them. I'm going to use a different color, 7 electrons. Here's the 7 that chlorine already had, and now it's going to gain the 1 from the lithium, signified by the X. Electrons, as we know, are negative charge. Electrons have a negative charge. So here, if it's gained a negative charge, it becomes a -1. And that's what we call ionic bonding, using dot and crosses. On this side, we have the covalent bonding. And electrons are shared. We have to remember that. And on the right-hand side, we have the ionic bonding, in which electrons are lost or gained. And you must remember to put the charge numbers on the left and right of the particular ions, remembering that an ion is a charged particle.